You put Iran in a different category. I keep reading and I talk to my sources.
Well, they're religious zealots. It's different.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
When I came in, I met with Obama. Right there, we sat. And we talked. I said, what's the biggest threat? North Korea.
You guys were yucking it up in the church
Yeah,
service.
we were. Someday I'll tell you what we said.
Someday you'll tell me.
No, we had a nice time. But he said North Korea is the biggest thing. And I solved that problem. And I got along with him. He's not a religious zealot.
Will you reach
he
out to
happens
him?
to be a smart guy. Kim Jong-un is a smart guy.
You'll reach out to him again.
I will. And the only thing I've said about Iran, and I want them to have a great country. They have great potential. The people are amazing. The only thing I said about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. And they are religious zealots.
Will you discuss what?
They are religious
Do you
zealots.
trust them?
There are ways that you can make it absolutely certain if you make a deal, a
Trust
certain
but
type
verify.
of a deal. And you have to verify times 10.
Yeah.
But they cannot have a nuclear weapon. And, you know, if they get one, you're going to have everyone else getting them, and then the whole thing is going to be a disaster.
That was President Trump on Sean Hannity night before last, talking about the Iran situation and actually a whole host of things. And we're going to discuss a number of those that he talked about there, because a lot of them have a lot of relevance to things that are important to us here at the Daniel Deep Dive Army, one of which you are. You're now officially a member of the Daniel Deep Dive Army. Don't know if you knew that. Just thought I'd throw that in there. But look, let's take a look at what Trump said there, because it's potentially very, very important, because he said there that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That begs the question, and how are you going to do that? Because one of the things that Trump has always ran on, really from his first term all the way through, was that he doesn't want any stupid wars. He wants to get out of wars. He said that in his inauguration speech. He wants to gauge success by the wars that he gets out of and the wars that he doesn't fight. He said that himself is one of his primary objectives. So we have to wonder, okay, when you make a declarative statement like that Iran won't or can't have a nuclear weapon, that implies some kind of enforcement mechanism. So we know that sanctions aren't going to work. With many people have already suggested that he go back to maximum pressure 2 on Iran, which was a key feature of the first one, which had disastrous consequences. There was the JCPOA, the so-called nuclear agreement that was in place when Trump assumed power in 2017, and in 2018 he got out of it. Since that time, the nuclear program for Iran has substantially expanded. So far, it's a nuclear power program, not a nuclear weapons program. According to the latest analysis of the CIA, still Iran has not made a decision to have a nuclear weapon, and they have not crossed the threshold of the number of key actions that would be required to move beyond nuclear power and move into nuclear weapons. But the question is going to be, how are you going to convince them to do that or how are you going to prevent them to do that if they take the step? Because then you're really reduced to one of a couple of things. Either they do get a nuclear weapon, or you use military force. And listen, everybody needs to be very clear on this, to include the president. If people have this idea that something along the lines of what we did with Bashar al-Assad in Syria while he was in power several times, I think 3 straight administrations used military weapons at one point. I think Obama, Trump, and then Biden at various times fired missiles into Syria. All kinds of allegations and reasons why they chose to do it, but they did it, and there was really no cost, because honestly, what is Syria going to do? We saw how weak they actually were when the Assad regime literally just disintegrated with the least little bit of pressure on an internal foe just a couple of months back. So there should be nobody's expectation, though, that that's what Iran would do. Iran is not Syria. They have substantial capacity to hit back. So if you launch some missiles in it, especially if you think you're going to destroy their nuclear program, the Iranians are very keenly aware of the capabilities of the United States and the West in general. And so they have built redundancy in their systems. They have taken significant precautions of moving some of it very deep underground, literally into the base of mountains in some cases. And they have it spread out in all different kinds of places. Many we know. It's possible there's some we don't. There's not as much of a chance of that, as at least not a big operation as you may think, because the IAEA, the UN agency, is actually still has, this is a surprise to many, still has some inspectors on the ground. They still have monitoring equipment, et cetera. So they have the capacity to find out if there's all of a sudden there's these nuclear signatures that you can detect if something starts to show up somewhere. And some things you just can't keep hidden, and they're always looking for that kind of stuff. So the chances exist, but it's not very high. Certainly not a big one. But the question comes that Trump has to grapple with: would you be willing to go to war against Iran to prevent them from having a nuclear weapon? And listen, we don't need to go down this path. Let me just categorically say this. So many people love to always hold the specter up of Iran and like they're this evil empire, and they want to destroy and wipe Israel off the map and all this kind of stuff. Listen, a little bit of honesty is probably appropriate here. Israel has, at least according to the late Jimmy Carter, about 200 nuclear weapons. That's what he publicly admitted one time. It's been an open secret. Everybody knows that Israel has nuclear weapons already. So they have the capacity to literally wipe Iran off the map, literally. And the Iranian side doesn't have the capacity. Iran can hurt Israel. And I think that the fact that Iran is very keenly aware that Israel has nuclear weapons is one of the reasons why they chose not to strike hard through their proxy Hezbollah during the Hezbollah war, in the active phase of it last year. Because I think that Israel almost certainly privately communicated to Tehran that if you use, overwhelm our Iron Dome systems, David Sling, all those different layers of their air defense system, if you overwhelm those with thousands of rockets from Hezbollah in Lebanon, or if Iran were to really unleash its full missile capacity against Israel, that they would respond with nuclear weapons. And that clearly had a deterrent effect on Iran. So we need to understand that Iran is not going to launch off into weapons. If they wouldn't do it when they were literally physically attacked by Israel and their proxies almost wiped out and severely degraded, they're not going to launch a preemptive strike against Israel, because Israel can, whatever Iran could ever do, Israel could do 100 times over practically. So we don't need to worry so much about Iran doing that. And then on the conventional level, Iran also has shown how weak they are. Understand that. This is really important to understand. Iran militarily has shown how weak really are in the region because of how the Houthis have been harmed but not destroyed by Israel. The Hezbollah has been severely harmed but not destroyed by Israel. And the Hamas, of course, has been severely degraded, though not destroyed by Israel. So you see that, and Iran could do nothing to help any of them out. Without, other than supplying a few missiles, they can't keep them afloat. And so Iran has been very keen to protect itself and to keep itself out of the crosshairs of any Israeli attack, other than the two relatively small ones that have taken place so far. They are deterred, and that's all you have to do. That's what's important to understand. America doesn't need to go in and take care of Iran, so to speak, because the region can do it. They have, remember, when we took down the Saddam Hussein regime, we actually took down one of the big balancing agents in the region against Iran. Well, that actually made it easier for Iran, because now they have a Shia regime in Baghdad, and so they're actually very friendly to it. The part of the Iraqi security forces are Iranian-backed militia. So yeah, thanks, George Bush. Well done on that. That actually helped out Iran, but all it did was just make it slightly less bad. But they're still balanced out even by other Arab regimes in the region, and obviously more than balanced, but overpowered by Israel. Ergo, we don't need to worry about that. The regional balance of power and balance of powers between the various countries there can take care of that issue. So America doesn't need to lead anything about keeping anything about nuclear weapons or whatever. The region can handle it. This is something we need. We need to take a bit of an appetite suppressant so that we don't get ourselves even more overextended and keeping our forces locked into places where they're not needed for our national security And they're not needed because this is what everybody always says on this side, Israel security. We can't withdraw our troops from Syria. We can't withdraw our troops from Qatar and Bahrain and all the other places in the Middle East that we have forces because it would leave little Israel alone. Well, Israel has shown militarily that it is more than capable of defending itself. And isn't that why we give $3 billion for more than a decade, have given $3 billion every single year to Israel so that they can build their own military capacity to defend themselves? That's the whole purpose of it. Otherwise, why are we spending that much money? Now, imagine how dumb this would be for us to say, we're going to give Israel $3 billion every year to help them defend themselves. But if they ever get into trouble, we're going to defend them. And as we did in the last administration here, where we physically used American fleets of aircraft carriers and air power and everything else to help defend against stuff from Iran. Well, listen, then why are we giving them $3 billion? If we're going to do this anyway, then why spend any money? Just let Israel have its own national defense, however it pays for it, like every nation on the planet. And then we'll, send our aircraft carriers there if they ever get into trouble. I'm not for that. Let me just be plain. But my point being, don't do both. Don't say, here's $3 billion and we're going to take care of your security force, because they don't need it. Israel is a friend of the United States and should be. And let me categorically say that, because I don't want to, have these crazy people come across and saying, oh, well, he's against Israel. No, I'm just for a balanced America first foreign policy. One of the things that Trump has led with, and I hope he actually governs with all the way through, America first. And America first doesn't mean no friends anywhere. We have plenty of friends and allies all over the planet. Israel's one in the Middle East. We have others in the Middle East. We have Europe, we have Asia. Of course, we got friends all over the place. But still, your foreign policy, which apparently is a actual order signed by the president, to have America first in all of its dealings with all these different countries. That's how it should be. By the way, it's a little odd in a certain sense that you have to designate that and write it out, because every country is supposed to, by default, do that, to put the needs and interests of its citizens first. Israel puts the needs of its citizens first, as it should. Qatar does, Saudi Arabia does, Kuwait does, all these different countries do. France does. Well, sometimes, but that's how it's supposed to be. That people look at their own needs first, and then they help others where it makes sense to them, where it's actually a mutually beneficial. So that's cool. Let's keep doing that. Let's just keep it in balance and not go, overboard with one country, Iran, when they are more than balanced out by other regimes in the region and definitely overpowered by Israel. Okay, so let's move on to the next one here. Trump also was talking about, in part of his conversation there with Sean Hannity, about his upcoming negotiations with Vladimir Putin. In this first clip here, we're going to look at, he's talking about the Putin aspect of this.
Putin shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have done it, and it has to stop. Do you know they've lost about 850,000 Russian soldiers and 700,000 Ukrainian soldiers?
And the Ukraine has been devastated.
Devastated.
Will it be a negotiated settlement, and will you lead the negotiations?
Well, I hope so. And I put out a truth today that's really strong, and I mean it. And if they don't do that, I'm going to put massive
If
tariffs.
they don't do what?
If they don't settle this war soon, like almost immediately, I'm going to put massive tariffs on Russia and massive taxes and also big sanctions. And I don't want to do that. I love the Russian people. They're great people. I don't want to do that, but we got to get this war ended.
Okay, well, I'm all about, we have to get this war ended. I'm all about the negotiated settlement. I've obviously been talking about that since this war started. So good on the president for that. But we need to take a deep breath here, and we need to have a sober view of what is actually possible. We had Ambassador Freeman talking about this on our show yesterday, and he made a comment in there which I thought was fantastic, and the best, I guess, encapsulation of what is possible and what is not in here in nearly a single sentence. And he said, you can never win at the negotiating table what your side can't achieve on a battlefield. So if 3 years of war have shown that you can't defeat the Russian side, the Ukraine, with all of the help the West has given it, all of the ammunition, weapons, training, intelligence support, targeting, long-range weapons. I mean, all this stuff, none of it has been able to change the dynamics on the battlefield. Remember, up until even some of the latter part of 2024, you still had Zelensky talking a bunch of stuff about 1991 borders, that they were going to continue to fight until they win, et cetera. Less than a year ago. Now then, that has lessened off, though apparently some in Ukraine are still saying, all right, well, not the 1991, but the 2022 borders prior to the onset of this war. And folks, that's just not going to happen. And if you can't win that on the battlefield, if you can't make it happen with everything that we have given, and of course, the literally hundreds of thousands of Russian and Ukrainian lives that have been sacrificed in this attempt, you're not going to get it succeeded by a negotiating deal, but Donald Trump. See, Trump is implying here that I'm just going to put some economic pressure on you, and then Putin will go, okay, dang it. All right, well, I don't want this economic pain, so sure, we'll settle for something less than what we want. That's never going to happen. And I hope that whether it's Special Envoy General Kellogg, or National Security Advisor Waltz, or the Secretary of Defense, who, by the way, I think is going to be, they're actually having the vote on him today, so it could be Pete Hegseth later this afternoon, or Secretary of State Rubio. Hopefully all those people are advising the president, telling the ground truth reality of what's true on the ground militarily, that Russia doesn't have to negotiate anything. And if Trump comes in thinking he's going to win at the negotiating table, something that they have failed through 3 years to win on the battlefield, then he's going to be setting himself up for disaster. And I think that that's something that's really, really important. And Trump is, at least at this point, seems to be going down that wrong path. He had a Truth Social post, I think it was 2 days ago, to where he basically said, hey, this is I'm giving you essentially an ultimatum. We can either do this the hard way or the easy way. And yeah, that's the one right there that we have used there. You see there at the end there, we can do it the easy way or the hard way. And it's always better to do it the easy way. And that didn't play well in Russia, I'll tell you. And in fact, a couple of reactions right away was one from one of the deputies in the Russian parliament, the Duma. He said, listen, we don't do well with those kinds of threats, and we don't need them. In fact, this I believe he was a retired major general, said, threatening us with ultimatums and scaring us with tariffs is just empty talk. If Trump decided to talk to Russia in the language of ultimatums, then he chooses an erroneous and dead-end strategy. Now, you might say, well, that's fine. That's expected. I mean, no one's going to say, sure, that's going to work against us. But as this analyst in the Russian, it's called Military Review, said a couple of things that really illuminate how the Russians are viewing this. And I think that the realities on the battlefield come closer to backing up this as being true than other views. This particular analyst says, judging by Trump's statements, he intends to convince Putin to make concessions on Ukraine using information about alleged problems in the Russian economy, threatening new sanctions like everything is very bad for you as it is, and it will get even worse. But here the American president is very much mistaken. Since the Russian economy is doing well, especially against the background of the economies of the Western European Union, it will not work to put pressure on Putin in this direction. And you've seen Larry Johnson on our show many times has talked about this, who he was there less than, I think, 5 or 6 months ago. We actually had him on live from this conference, this economic conference that he was attending in Russia on that. And he's sitting there saying, hey, listen, I see a very modern country here with a thriving economy. You may recall Tucker Carlson, and I want to say it was February of last year when he interviewed Vladimir Putin, and again was going throughout Russia and just showing what it's like in different places, grocery stores, shopping malls, whatever. And he said he sees no evidence of a struggling economy. So if you want to threaten somebody with sanctions and you want it to bite, then you have to have evidence that the economy is like teetering. It's on the brink or something, so that a little bit more pressure could cause it to collapse, and that would frighten the other side, saying, well, the cost of our economic collapse would be higher than whatever they're asking for on the battlefield. So we might have to concede something. That would have to exist for economic pressure to have any effect. But goodness gracious, can anyone argue that everything under the sun has not been done economically with sanctions, and all of it has failed? A lot of people don't recognize it, but Trump himself, when he was president in his first term, had huge numbers of sanctions on Russia. Russia's very much aware of it. Not many in the West are anymore. And it had very limited effect, and it had very limited economic effect on Russia, but no policy effect whatsoever. It didn't cause them to do anything that they didn't want to do. And then, of course, once the war started, the Biden administration, and all the European Union combined just heaved these, historic sanctions on Russia, which have more backfired on the Western European economies than on the Russian. It's caused more difficulty to that than it ever did to Russia, and obviously never, ever changed their policies. As a result of all that, the Russians have retooled their economy, redirected where their focus was on economic opportunities now to other places which are nearly sanction proof. So it's a laughable threat for the Ukraine side. For the Russian side, about Trump coming in thinking he's going to get Putin to actually negotiate away any of his territorial gains or any of the things that he wants on the ground in order to get, this sanctions relief or fear of more sanctions taken off the table. And going back to that military review, that analysis said for Putin, the true goal is to secure a friendly Ukraine, which they define as being neutral and non-aligned and denazified, however they define that. That's how they define a friendly Ukraine. And Putin believes that his goal can be achieved sooner or later, regardless of U.S. policy. Peace for Putin is just a means to achieve this goal faster and cheaper. A peace agreement on Russian terms would save significant resources, but without such an agreement, Putin is willing to fight for as long as it takes to achieve his end. That is one of the things that we've been saying, we've observed just from the outside. And now here, Russian analysts on Russian military review channel, where a lot of military stuff is discussed openly, they're saying the same thing. They see on the battlefield that they can win the war according to their definition, which means all of the four oblasts, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Luhansk, and Donetsk, all of them, by force of arms. Or it makes sense. That's why Putin keeps saying he's willing to talk. He is, because it would be better for him to be able to accomplish his territorial ambitions and his security ambitions with this buffer state, this non-NATO, non-nuclear, non-aligned rump state of Ukraine. That's better for him to have on his border than to be right next to Ukraine, i.e., he doesn't even want to conquer all of Ukraine, because that would still give him the same dilemma. Now he would have this, quote, new border on the border with NATO. So that's not what he wants. And of course, it would just be disaster of epic proportions, and a headache indefinitely for the Russian side if they had to try and pacify and keep safe the western part of Ukraine, because they would never, the Ukrainians, I don't think for generations, would never be pacified. I think they would be doing partisan activity the whole time and just, killing Russians left and right. And it would just be an ugly, ugly affair. There was a lot of experience with that in the Second World War during the period of time when, during the Soviet period, there was a lot of difficulties right there, especially in the early part. Putin knows well that history and has no intention of repeating that. But he's definitely also knows about the demographics in especially the western and central parts of Ukraine, and very much does want to have those Russian-speaking and ethnic Russians inside of the Russian Federation. He can take it if he desires to do so. If Trump thinks that he's going to negotiate that away and have something better where Ukraine has more of the territory than it does right now, or that he'll even avoid a freezing of the line where it's at right now, which apparently is one of the things that General Kellogg wants to do, that's not going to happen, folks, because the Russians don't have to. So again, it's really important for Trump to understand, if you want a good negotiated settlement, it has to, as the Russians have said, reflect the ground truth realities. And now looking at the other side of that equation, the Ukraine side, Trump also was asked about Volodymyr Zelensky.
And Zelensky, I will say this, he wants to settle now. He's had enough. He shouldn't have allowed this to happen either.
No.
You know, if he's no angel,
Right.
he shouldn't have allowed this war to happen. First of all, he's fighting a much bigger entity, okay? Much bigger. When he was, you know, talking so brave and so. Now, two things happened. They were brave, but we gave them billions of dollars. The United States spent $200 billion more than Europe. Why did we spend more? You know why? Because Biden never asked Europe to spend more. They spent 200.
It became a U.S.-Russia proxy war because of Joe.
Zelensky was fighting a much bigger entity. He shouldn't have done that because we could have made a deal, and it would have been a deal that would have been, it would have been a nothing deal. I could have made that deal so easily. And Zelensky decided that I want to fight, you know, they have 30,000 army tanks. Russia has 30,000 army tanks. Zelensky had none, practically. You don't fight those. Now, then we started pouring equipment, pouring. And they had the bravery to use the equipment. But in the end, that's a war has to be settled.
Yeah, that's an interesting there because I'm pretty certain that no Western leader, and I mean no Western leader, okay, well, with the exception of Orban and Fico from Slovakia, other than those two, none of the major Western leaders, France, Germany, Italy, certainly the UK, definitely the United States, has never said anything remotely similar to that. In fact, what they have done most lavishly at the Washington summit of the NATO last summer, just lavished praise upon Zelensky and said he was this heroic figure. Of course, you remember that everybody called him Winston Churchill in the beginning, Churchill in a T-shirt. You know, everybody tried to make it modern, and he's always just been lavished every time, even to this day with the current Secretary General, Mark Rutte. Every time that he talks about him, it's always in these glowing praises. And now here comes Trump going, okay, this Zelensky dude, he's no angel. He deserves some blame too, because this war should never have started. So that shows you a pretty dramatic shift here. And that also shows you, and I think that it illuminates a little bit how these negotiations may go. Because if Trump viewed Zelensky as an angel or as this heroic figure, he might be willing to put a little bit more price and pay a little bit higher price to continue to try to really get a good deal for the Ukraine side. But when he communicates to you that he's saying this guy's no angel, he should have never fought this war, he should have never gone on, and he could have ended it before. I think he's telling you that, listen, I want this good deal with Russia and with Putin, but if things start going south, and it's either make a bad deal or lose, then I think that he's going to say Zelensky's going to be cut loose. So I think Zelensky needs to understand that if he thinks that he's going to still be the poster boy and the golden child, like he has been for most of the West ever since this war started, he should be disabused of that belief right now and should understand that when it comes to negotiations, that all Trump has to do is say, all right, I've agreed with X, Y, and Z with Putin, and you're not going to get any more stuff. Then it's almost not going to matter what happens with the West. And we've shown you here in a couple of days ago, in recent days, that Zelensky was at Davos and made a bunch of speeches, and there are a lot of comments he made about, wanting security guarantees and kind of trying to distance himself from Trump a little bit by saying, hey, we Europeans, we got to stick together. And it's, he's going back to that same old line of reasoning he used early in the war, that we're fighting for you, Europe, and we have to all stick together. So you got to keep giving us stuff. See, the problem is Zelensky himself in his Davos speech admitted the inability of the Western European nations to actually provide such guarantees. He pointed out, he said he had somewhere around 800,000 active troops. And then he pointed out that the highest number of troops in all of the other European armies was France at 200,000. It is hard to get into your mind how small 200,000 is in modern warfare, because that's the sum total of their active force. That's not 200,000 fighting men, that's just 200,000, because in any kind of an army, you have to have logistics, you have to have institutional people, like schools have to be manned, your training centers, lots of logistics, etc. And then a relatively small number of actual fighters, mechanics, those kinds of things. When I haven't seen the numbers, but just knowing how the U.S. Army is filled, I bet you'd be lucky if you had 40,000 actual fighting men in France. No kidding, because all the rest of this is support and support functions and institutional functions. And so France is not going to get into a war with Russia, because the Russians have a majority, especially of the number of forces inside of Ukraine, which, according to the Ukrainian intelligence services late last year, was somewhere around 700,000. 700,000 Russian troops. And those are war fighters for the most part. The Russians also have, just understand, they got about 1.5 million total in their army active duty. So that means that there's about 800,000 still in Russia or in these various other places. And they have, border security all around their territory as well. So there's a lot of them are spread out, but, a lot of their logistics and their supply, their institutional support, all those other kinds of things, those are mainly in that 800,000 that's over there. So the majority of the fighters are in Russia. Even then, they still have some, support and supply and logistics, et cetera. But I bet you could have upwards of 450,000 actual fighting men, and nobody else in the entire Europe can match that. So they're not going to give. Well, number one, nobody in Europe is actually going to go to war with Russia, because they know that the chance of it going nuclear is very high. No one wants to risk that. No one wants to risk their troops. And this really bizarre thing that we also showed you, I think just yesterday, where Zelensky told an American TV reporter that he wants a large number, more than somewhere between 100 and 200,000 troops as peacekeepers, but he specified that he wants them on the front line and that he wants some of them to be American. Fair enough if that's what you want, but gracious, that's never going to happen. I mean, you hear Trump, what I just showed you with him saying, and he's not going down that path of even, giving you a good negotiated settlement or risking much on your behalf. He certainly is not going to put American troops on the ground. That was even a red line for Joe Biden. All the stuff that he did for 3 years, even for him, troops on the ground was a no-go. No troops, other than apparently a handful to fire ATACMS and some others, these long-range weapon systems. Some small number is even there. But in terms of peacekeeping forces on the front line against Russia, no, because he knows that it would be a revolt in the United States against him if he had ever thought about doing something. Trump has even less incentive to do so, and frankly, flatly, is not going to do so. So that just kind of shows you really where Trump is when he's heading into this negotiated position here with Vladimir Putin. And we're still waiting to find out, by the way, when that first meeting is going to take place. It was apparently going to come within days, they said, of his inauguration. Maybe it's happened behind the scenes. I don't know yet, but we have no official accommodation nor any plans talked about by either side. So we'll have to wait and see how that's going to go. Let's see. The next thing he talked about was, one other interesting things he talked about was that there's going to be a denuclearization. Now, when he first used this term, I actually thought he must have been talking about North Korea, because I know that there had been some discussion about North Korea. But no, he's talking about the United States and Russia and China. So this is really a kind of coming out of nowhere, because at all the time during his running for president and his campaign and all this, and since the time he got elected, he's not said anything about denuclearization. So he kind of dropped this big bombshell recently, and here's how he said it to Fox News.
I was dealing at the very end, with Putin about the denuclearization of Russia and the United States. And then we were going to bring China along on that one, because they have much less than we do. China, believe it or not, is much less. They will have an equal amount in 5 years, 6 years. They're trying to get there, unfortunately. But right now they have much less in terms of nuclear. I was very close to having a deal. I would have made a deal with Putin on that denuclearization. It's very dangerous and very expensive, okay, both. And that would have been great, but we had a bad election that interrupted us, and that's why I'm here now.
Okay, just on the surface of it, categorically, I'm all for this. That's anything to lower the threshold for nuclear weapons use is a huge thing for mankind. For mankind, not even just for the United States, definitely for our side too. So if President Trump wants to go down a path of saying, "Hey, I want to look at, nuclear weapons reduction plans," there's still some talk about a new START treaty, or an updated one, or a continuation of something that had been mothballed for a long time. Anybody's talking about that, I am all for it. But we also need to keep, a sober view on this, because he mentioned in there that China's on a nuclear weapons buildup. By 2030, they want to have 1,000 serviceable nuclear warheads. We have somewhere around 5,000 something. The Russians have somewhere around 5,000 something. A bunch. Now I'm talking about operational. Quite a bit more in storage and could be used, but that's really kind of irrelevant. Once you get past just a handful of nuclear weapons, 30, 40, it becomes superfluous and irrelevant, frankly, because if you use that many nuclear weapons and you've got that many or more coming back in your direction, and life as it will be over. So it doesn't really matter whether. I think China, last I saw, had 300, and they were moving to make that higher. If they get all the way to 1,000, 1,000, 5,000 doesn't make any difference. It's catastrophic, and it would be so for any nation that ever sought to use them. The whole mutually assured destruction theory is still fully engaged, and it will be. That's why it is so crucial to back down from this. We know from the last FBI or CIA director, Bill Burns, admitted publicly that the Russians were close to using tactical nuclear weapons in 2022 when they were suffering some setbacks on the battlefield. That's inside Ukraine. If they ever felt an existential threat to their actual territory, then again, the chance would be high that they would use it, as it would be for the West. If Russia ever crossed any red lines, and if they used any nuclear weapons, if they were to attack conventionally across into NATO, the chance would be very high that they would use them, as opposed to allowing themselves to ever be defeated. That's why they have nuclear weapons, to deter great powers from doing things on the battlefield. So anything we can do to reduce the number of the weapons, to reduce the propensity to use them, to lower the threshold doctrinally of their employment, those are all great things. But gracious folks, I mean, right now with this whole war in Ukraine going on, all this friction, and you have so many in the West talking about how, well, I think that there could be a war with Russia in 5 to 8 years, so we're on a big military buildup, and Russian, especially on the hawkish side within their government, within their Politburo and the Kremlin, they're saying the same thing. They say that we see what these guys in the West are doing. We also have to have a military buildup, and because we could be fighting them, etc. That makes the risk even beyond this Russia-Ukraine war. That means the risk is going to continue on of a clash that could all too easily go nuclear. So, yes, we need to keep going down that path, but we have to be very, very careful about how we conduct ourselves, because it's not just you can't have a nuclear negotiation to reduce threat while you're simultaneously building up your conventional forces and pointing a finger at the other side and saying, yes, we have to get ready for a war with them, because those things are inextricable. They have to both be done in tandem, or neither one of them are going to be done. Then we're just going to continue having a buildup in both cases. Russians building up their nuclear stockpile. We are modernizing ours and building ours up as well. China, of course, as I said. You have to do something to simultaneously lower the threat for their usage and the threat of conflict at all. That's why people have these nuclear weapons, is to prevent a conventional attack on them like during World War II. So if Trump wants to do this, and I certainly hope that he does, I hope this is not just, some kind of thing to say, or, just a crazy thing to throw out there, a trial balloon. I hope he really means it, but it has to be, and everybody needs to understand this, it has to be concurrent with conventional forces as well. And everybody benefits if we go down this path. Let me just again categorically say this. We do need to do this. There does not need to be conflict among any of these parties. No one would benefit from it. No, neither Russia nor Ukraine has benefited from this war here for 3 years. And even if there's a negotiated settlement pretty soon, or Russia ends up winning, it will have cost Russia a great deal. There will be a generation or more of hatred. There's a much higher fear of Russia, especially in the Eastern European states. So there's going to be a cost to this that's going to go well beyond when this is over. So we need to make sure that that serves as a lesson to what we need to do now. Let's build, I hate to even use it because it has such negative connotations. I don't want to like build a peacenik kind of thing, because that's usually mocked by people, especially those who benefit from money, from weapons and sales and all this kind of stuff. They have a motivation to keep that fear going because it generates a lot of cash. We actually have a show this afternoon where we're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail with Colonel Jacques Beau. That's coming up later this afternoon at 2 p.m., I believe. So you're not going to want to miss that one. But that is an inhibition and a roadblock to get peace and to lower the threat of both conventional and nuclear weapons, because a lot of people, frankly, make money on keeping that fear alive. But I want to keep us alive. I don't want to keep the fear alive. I want to keep us alive. I want to keep us in a world where there's peace and security and opportunity to prosper, and good neighborly relations into the future become possible. There's no reason why we can't be good friends with China, why we can't be good friends. Well, okay, during my lifetime, probably good friends with Russia is probably not going to be achievable in the West, but normal, stable relations very much is possible, even in our generation. It can happen if we have leaders with the right vision and the willingness to provide leadership to get us there. We can have stable, efficient, and effective relations that keeps us safe, keeps them, and they have to feel safe too, because if the other side doesn't feel safe, then they're going to keep taking actions, and you have this security dilemma where each side sees the other and they keep ramping things up. Both sides have to have some reasonable projection that they're going to have security from their neighbors. And then all kinds of good things are possible. You can do trade, you can do economic, you can do cultural, you can do arts, sports. Everything becomes possible in that, which is great for everybody. Everybody wins in this scenario. You go down the other path, potentially everybody could lose. Let's don't do that. Thanks very much for being with us today. We always appreciate you. Like I said a second ago, we have Colonel Jacques Beau at 2 o'clock today. How to make more money in the Ukraine-Russia war. Obviously, this is a satire and something that we are mocking because it's pathetic, but there's a lot of people who are actively lobbying for just that outcome here. We're going to talk about that today, and maybe Colonel Beau can tell us some ways to bypass that and get around these warmongers. Anyway, look forward to seeing you at 2 o'clock this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.